Okay, so once again, for the recording, just a quick disclaimer, this call is being recorded and we place our recordings on our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. Okay, and this call is joined by our Microsoft team members as well as members from our customers and partners. So today's topic, Azure Container Instances. Okay, um, quickly, um, here's the quick agenda. We covered this topic maybe a year or so ago, at, and today we are just looking at some new updates. Just we always do. We do a quick level set, what the service is, few minutes. Then we look at some of the key features, enhancements that have happened, and then we look at some common use cases. So that's what we're gonna do today. Okay. So first of all, for the level set, um, Azure Container Instances is a Azure PaaS service that allows you to spin up containers on demand. So you don't have to have a VM running somewhere, or you don't have to have um, a kind of AKS cluster. Nothing. Basically, what you do is you just you go in there and you just spin up a AKS, sorry, a Kubernetes ACI, what they call ACI instance, or a container. Okay, you just need an image, and you can basically go from there. And folks, I would really appreciate if you can please pause yourself if you're not asking a question. Thank you. So the just keep in mind that this is not a replacement for a full-fledged container orchestration solution like AKS. It is there for some specific scenario, and we'll talk about these scenarios towards the end. Okay. And for example, let's say that you want to have, you are running some tests, okay, or you are running some processes, and those processes needs to run on a full-fledged VM, but you don't want to run a VM because it takes a long time to run it and then shut it down and all that. Instead, you can run a container, okay? And that's where it comes in. So basically in your pipeline, let's say if you're running through GitHub or something, or you, as a part of your process, you can invoke a logic app, which can invoke a Azure Container Instance, and that's how you can run your process over there. And we'll look into a bit more detail in the next few minutes. Okay, so let's continue on. So first of all, the one of the big enhancements that have come and that's constantly being improved is the integration with virtual networks. When ACI came out, you cannot deploy them in, or ACI means Azure Container Instance came out, you could not deploy them in a VNet. They were basically living um, outside in kind of a public infrastructure, and there was no way to connect to a VNet. But for, as we all understand, for enterprise scenario, it's a key thing. I mean, enterprise customer have their infrastructure running in their virtual networks, and they need connectivity back and forth. And that's where you have this ACI virtual network scenario where you can deploy them in a virtual network. There are some limitations there. There's support for load balancer and things like that. That is not yet there, in addition to global VNet peering. But what you can do is, let's say that you have a process that you need to run on an ACI. You can deploy that. You can run that container as an Azure Container Instance inside your VNet. And let's say it need to access some information from your on-prem. If that VNet is connected to on-prem using ExpressRoute or site-to-site VPN, then it will be able to access that data from there. Okay, and that's how that's how enterprise customer can take advantage of that. Okay. So moving further, and at the same time, all the goodies that comes with a virtual network like NSG support, firewall, and all that, you can take advantage of these with the virtual network scenario. So what we are going to do is, first of all, we're going to take a look how quickly you can spin up a container instance. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you from the portal how to do it, but then we're going to spin it up from a command line. Okay, just to show you how quickly we can do that, because sometimes portal doesn't do justice with that. Okay, so here is your resource group. And actually, let me go in here, go to home and container instances. I'm going to create a new container instance. And some of the stuff is very kind of boilerplate. You basically pick up the resource group and the subscription, and then you have to give it a name. Okay, so here is one thing to keep in mind. If you are creating this container inside a VNet, the name doesn't have to be globally unique. But if you are creating a container like a public ACI container, not inside a VNet, then it has to be globally unique. Just keep that in mind. Okay. And then, of course, you can pick a region, you can pick what are the availability zones and all that, and then where that image will come from. Do you want an image from your, that like a sample images which are there as a quick start images? You have your own container registry, or you are picking it up from a Docker Hub or some private registry. And then the sizes. This is one thing to keep in mind. Number of CPU cores, how much memory, it can be 1 to 4. So these are the size that are available. GPU support is currently in preview, so you can pick up which GPU you want to use. And then you go on, okay, do you want to make it public? In that case, it will have a public IP address. None will not create a public or you know, so think of it. You want to run a container. It's not running a web application or anything. Basically, that container is running a process. Okay. Let me give you an example. Um, some customers have asked me, hey, we want to run CLI, kind of a CLI script, bash script. And we want to use Azure Function, but Azure Function only support PowerShell. How we can run that? That is one of the way you can do it. You can use a container instance and you can bootstrap it through an Azure Function or through a logic app. So basically, a logic app triggers this ACI. That ACI has your script and everything. Once it runs your entire script, saves all the data, and that's it. And then you're done. So that's the scenario where you will use none. In that case, you don't want anybody to access it. There is no FQDN or anything to access it because it doesn't have a web app or any API hosted in it. Okay. The only thing you have there is a bash script that runs. Once it finishes, the container can be destroyed. Okay. On the other hand, you want to do private. In that case, what you do is you take that container instance and deploy it inside a virtual network. Okay. That's the scenario. That's more of the enterprise scenario where that container need to access resources uh, from your virtual network or through that virtual network from your on-prem environment. Okay. Any question? Okay. And the public scenario is, as I said, now you want to host a container. It may be running some kind of a test web app that you want to run it for some time or something, or maybe just some testing result dashboard that you want to run to get the, to see the testing data. And just keep in mind, doesn't matter if it has a public, private, or none, you want to get the logs out of that container, you can use that, AZ container commands or PowerShell or CLI to get those logs out. Okay. Go to next. This is very interesting. Okay, what is your restart policy? When you want to restart the container, do you want to always restart? Do you never want to restart or on failure? Okay, so what that means is that you wanna if there is a failure you want it to restart or never, and at the same time, do you always, so maybe you're running something which kind of runs then dies, then you start it back up again and it runs again, so your container can continue to restart doing something and then going back to sleep. So that's one of the scenario. And also you can provide environment variables here. So for example, you have some information, key value pairs, and the form and environment variables that you want to provide. You can add those environment variables here. Okay. And one more thing here is you can make them secure. So if you make an environment variable secure, what happens is you won't be able to see its value here. Okay, value is only available in the container instance. And the final part is the command line. So that's uh, how this when the container is running, you can run this command line. So let's say that you want to run the container and then you have a batch script there that you want to run. That's how you will do it. Okay. So let's quickly go in, and I'm just going to run a container here. Okay, first of all, in here, and what's this? Go into shell, and I'm going to name it, and you will see how quickly. Okay, there. Sorry, I think I screwed up. I think I need to change the DNS name as well. Okay, so now what it's going to do is going to start a container, and with that particular DNS name. So while it is coming, let's see what we can do with the container instances that we already have. Okay, so I have, as you can see, a few container instances. Let me go in here, and these are the container instances that are already running. Let's look at this one. So first of all, overview, activity log, I mean, that's pretty standard. These are what containers. So basically a container instances, you may have a sidecar container and all. It gives you what events that happened, image was pulled, created, and then started, all of that stuff. Um, Properties, what are some of the properties, like CPU size, all that. Let me just increase the font size a little bit so everybody can see it. Okay. And let me logs. So these are the logs. I mean, definitely you can get those logs out from from the command, but the logs are available over here as well. And this is, to me, is the most interesting. Basically, you can log in to your container. So this is my container instance that's running. I can log in and look. I can, look into what is it. So let's say that you are running a batch or some process that you're running in a container instance, and that process isn't working. You can log in and see what is going on there. the instance is in your hands. You can check on the health of that and all of those things. Okay. So let's see where is our container instance. It has been created. So let's come back here and refresh it. This is the one that we have created. It has a public FQDN. Let's pick it up. Let's try to open it here. And yeah, so I mean, nothing earth shattering. I'm using a sample that is available in documentation. And folks, I purposefully try to use the samples that are in documentation. Number one, I don't have to upload any code or anything. Number two, they are easily available for everyone to use, and they are, they kind of update them as new updates are made to the service. So that's one. So once again, this is a sample, uh, kind of a container that I had. It's running, as you can see in a few seconds, this container is up and running. And the second part is I want to show you, let me show you the command line when you want to deploy a container inside a VNet. So let's take a look. Okay, so that's where you're in. Now you have the image, and then you wanna set up the VNet, and this is where you have an existing VNet, and you deploy that in a subnet. Just keep that in mind that the subnet where your container is gonna go, you cannot deploy anything else. That subnet is taken over by ACI. Only Azure Container Instances can be deployed inside that. So if you have a lot of containers that you are planning to spin up, you may wanna set the size of that subnet accordingly. Because if you make it too short, then you may have an issue. And at the same time, you may wanna have, if you wanna deploy different things in that VNet, you may wanna plan ahead and have multiple subnet so you can deploy these things in those subnets, other subnets, and while your ACI is, I mean, well, that one subnet is dedicated to the ACI. Okay, so just keep in mind when you're deploying in a subnet, ACI takes a bit more time to spin up versus when you're deploying it without like a public ACI, things like that. Okay. So let me show you here. Container instances, I have one of them that is deployed inside a VNet. So let's take a look at that. As you can see, it has a private IP address, okay? 10.9.0.4. There is no FQDN. It's a private IP address. And what I have done is, and let's go to that subnet where it is deployed. So what we are gonna do, we are gonna go in here and we are going to go into that particular VNet and see what is going on over there. So this is the VNet. And if you see there are two subnet, VM subnet and ACI subnet. And look at that. The ACI subnet is delegated to Azure Container Instance and container group. So only container instance can be deployed in that. Okay. So let's just keep that in mind. And now in that VM subnet, I have deployed a virtual machine, and that can access. So I have this virtual machine that is deployed, and I can access that container. So once I access it, as you can see, same code running, I'm able to access it. Nothing earth shattering. Once more, just to prove the point that you have now connectivity from within your VNet to that ACI and not from outside. Okay. So any questions? Okay.
Thing with the chat, Naveed.
Nothing in the chat? Thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, man. Okay. So these are the two things. Okay. Um, the third thing that I want to talk about is the ability to mount files. You know that containers by nature are stateless. You know, when their containers are created, if you're creating anything, it is destroyed once you destroy the container's life cycle end. How you persist data, that's where file mount comes into picture. Basically, you can take Azure files and you can mount them, um, file share, Azure file shares, and you can mount them into your containers. Okay. So what will happen is, let's say that you have a container instance and multiple container instance, and they all need to share data. Maybe some of the container instance is writing while another container instance is reading, or maybe all of them are writing logs or some sort, and you don't want them to go to different places. You want them to a single place. You can have a file share that is mounted to in all these container instances, and they are all writing data to that file share. Okay, that's definitely a good use of Azure File Share. So let me show you one example. And by the way, the process is very kind of a straightforward. You create a storage account, you create an Azure File Share. Let me show you. I already have a storage account here, and I have created a file share. So this is my storage account, and I have created a file share in it, ACI files. And then what I have done is I have mounted this file share into a container instance. So let's go back to our container instances, and there is a container instance hello files, and I have mounted that file share. So let's go into here, and what we are gonna do is let's go in this file share and let's see if we can delete all these files. Okay, I have deleted all the files, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and connect to that container instance. So as you can see, this is a simple container instance, and whatever I type in here, test data one, uh, it's gonna store that in that file share as a file. So let's go back to this file share and let's refresh it. As you can see, it has created the file. And what we can do is if we try to edit it, let's see. So it is the data that we create. Once again, I mean, no, very simple, straightforward way of sharing data, and it's simple to set up. So let me share with you a few things here. So give me 1 second. Let me just paste it here in the command line. Okay. So this is how you will create a container with a file share. And by the way, there are some limitations that you should be aware of. It's only supported for Linux at the moment, and it only supports CIFS file share. So just keep that in mind. So kind of this is how I am creating a container. I mean, it's a Microsoft standard image for Quick Start, and I'm mounting a file share on top of it to uh, basically to share data. Okay. So just let's quickly go back to the presentation and just wanna. So I just added a few slides here. Oh, one quick thing, how you integrate with Azure services. One thing is Azure Functions. So Azure Function with PowerShell functions, you can call, I mean, once you have PowerShell, you can call AZ Container Instances, module, and you can create container instance from there. And at the same time, with the Logic apps, you now have a container instance connector. Okay. And let's see that example. So let's go in here once again. So we are in our resource group. I'm gonna open the logic app. Let's edit this logic app in a designer. So it's a simple logic app. You get a HTTP request. It has a just request a name, and this is your container instance connector. Okay, you have your usual suspects, resource group, subscription. Then you do a container group, define the region, what's the name of your container, what's the name of container image. I'm just hard coding it. You can get that value. So the point is, let's say that you have a process that is running, and in that process, you need to run some patches or some process some data or things like that. That's where you can set this up through logic apps, set up, create the um, container instance, and let it do all the processing, and then it just goes away. So you don't have to pay for the entire VM, just pay for the container instances as long as it's running. Okay. So logic app is one way of doing it. And the way you do it is as, let me just kind of a double re-emphasize it, let it come up. So this is through the uh, container. Yes, so this is that connector I was talking about. You have a and that connector not only have the support for creating a container group, you can delete it, you can list. So basically, you can get cached images and all that stuff. So this is how you will create. I mean, how you will kind of create sort of a pipeline where you can, from your process, you can create a container group and then go from there. Let's say there's a third party event that happens, you can invoke the logic app, which do the container instance. It does all the work and then just goes away. Okay. So with that, I know we are only 2 minutes. I knew it's a lot of content. So let's quickly go into the container instances and how you get the monitoring and logging information. One way is you can get all that information from command line. The other one is you have these, container logs. You can see the logs from here, and then it integrates with Azure Monitor, so you can get those alerts and monitoring information from the Azure Monitor as well. Oh, one thing I definitely want to mention is managed identity. So let's say that in your container, you need to get some data from certain resources, which kind of rely on managed identity. Um, you can basically enable managed identity and use that identity to access data from those Azure services. Just keep in mind, right now, the support is not there to get images for a VNet injected ACI from a private ACR. So let's say that you have an ACR, you put a private endpoint to that ACR into the VNet, and now you want Azure Container Instance to get its image from that ACR over the private endpoint using managed identity. That capability is not there. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, so we are right on time. Any questions? Sorry, folks. Uh, I I think I had a little more content.
See a hand
Let me,
raised, Naveed. Maybe there is a question.
yeah, go ahead, please.
Which
Uh, Feel free to open your mic and ask it.
Hi, folks. I'm Nandini, PM from the ACI team. Um,
Hi, Nandini. How are you?
good, good. Hi. Thanks for this presentation. And so I just wanted to make a small correction in the last statement. So we have added support um, to use manage entity to securely access your images from your private Azure Container Registry behind a private endpoint. So that was not available last year, but it's the support is added and you can use it for production. So it's become a trusted service. It's become ACI is now officially a ACR trusted service. What that means is you can use managed entity to access if your container registry is in a your own custom virtual network, and ACI is also, as Navneet said, like in your own dedicated subnet. As long everything is there within that one virtual network, you can still securely access your images. That feature is available. It's GA is ready to use for production. So I just wanted to make sure I want to add that correction. And manage entity support is available for Linux containers. It's in preview. We are going to also add support for Windows containers, and it will become GA in the next a couple of months. So keep checking the public documentation page. We have added detailed documentation for the earlier support that we have added, where ACI is now an ACR trusted service. That documentation is there. So I just wanted to make sure that, because that was just announced in January, so maybe there's no, you all didn't have a chance to take a look. I just wanted to make that additional comment. Thanks,
No,
Navneet.
thank you very much. Really appreciate it, and thank you for correcting me because I know that that support wasn't there, and I have some customers who were blocked, and that's a great news. Thank you. Thanks. Any other questions, comments, feedback?
Nothing on the chat, Naveed.
Thank you. No, thanks, Allah. Thank you, everyone, for joining, and hope to see everybody next week. And have a wonderful weekend, everyone.